to discuss that, as well as the then firing of Tom Herman. They win a bowl game. Texas is back. You know who's not back? Tom Herman. Bruce Feldman of The Athletic and Fox Sports. Happy New Year to you, Bruce.
Happy New Year, Rich. Good to be on with you.
To be had with you right here. Let's get right into Texas. What happened there with Tom Herman? Bruce?
You know, Rich, right around 3 weeks ago, Chris Del Conte, the AD at Texas, put out a statement that was really carefully worded, very cryptic. I remember we talked about it on our show the day it came out, where a lot of people were reading into it like it was like this vote of confidence that Tom Herman was going to be the guy, he's going to remain our coach. And, you know, it was worth noting at the time that statement came out 4 days before National Signing Day. So it was basically like to try to do the best they could to kind of keep recruiting on track as best they could. But then after, they had a nice bowl win against, an undermanned, underwhelming Colorado team. But I don't think that gave anybody else the feeling inside Texas that they felt any more confident that Tom Herman was going to get it done there. And so they ripped the Band-Aid off. And, look, we had reported this probably, I want to say in like early December, that Texas brass had made the decision to move on from Tom Herman. And really what that seemed to focusing on is, okay, it's Urban Meyer or bust. Well, Urban Meyer obviously didn't want that job and didn't want to go back to college football. But the mindset of Tom Herman, it's like the players were, from what I had heard, were over him. They just didn't feel the connection to him. They didn't buy into him at that point. And at that point, it was like, okay, what are we doing here? We're going to keep spinning our wheels. They had made the determination. Texas had been vetting Steve Sarkisian, felt very comfortable with where Sarkisian is at right now. And he's had obviously a great couple of years in Tuscaloosa. And they moved fast. You wouldn't have spent the money they spent, which is $15 million just on Tom Herman to get rid of him, if you didn't have somebody lined up, which they did.
Okay, so it seems that the position of coordinating the offense for Alabama more often than not is a career rehabilitator. See Kiffin, Lane, and now Sarkisian, Steve. I couldn't help but notice your tweet today about who might be next for that job, Bruce Feldman.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Alabama.
These are two former, recently fired NFL head coaches. Bill O'Brien, formerly of the Texans, and Adam Gase of the Jets. And if you're a Jets fan or somebody like that, you're probably going, Adam Gase, right? Look, Adam Gase was a student assistant when Nick Saban was in the Big Ten at Michigan State. That's where he got to know him. Nick Saban brought him as a graduate assistant to LSU. And remember, an OC a few years ago who did well for Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa was Brian Daboll, who, by the way, was a grad assistant at Michigan State of Saban way back then. So those are two of the names I heard Saban's really considering. And obviously the connection to Bill O'Brien is obviously Bill O'Brien is a Belichick protege, and obviously Saban and he are very close. So we'll see, what direction Nick Saban wants to go. I mean, as people have said, he has rehabilitated the images of many, many coaches. So, it's like, people will roll their eyes, but, I'm not sure anybody thought, 5 years ago that Steve Sarkisian was going to be one of the hottest names in coaching. And he is. Or, thought some of the things would have happened. I don't think they thought Lane Kiffin would end up where he is. I don't think they thought Mike Locksley would get a Big Ten job. So it's the wonders of Nick Saban.
Well, a co-offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach there moved to Michigan to be the offensive coordinator in Josh Gaddis, and that really hasn't worked out yet. What is going on with my alma mater? A contract extension is sitting there for Jim Harbaugh to sign. I'm not familiar with the terms. I'm wondering if the terms are not to Jim's complete liking. Otherwise, his John Hancock would be on it right now, unless he's hoping that he's Justin Herbert's next head coach, or Sam Darnold, or Justin Fields' next head coach with the Jets. What is going on with my alma mater and Jim Harbaugh, who could be the coach still there tomorrow with a new extension or something else? What's going on? with this?
Rich, my understanding from talking to sources is, and we'd reported this over the weekend, that they have a contract extension through 2026 that he feels pretty good about from what I've been told.
Okay.
Now, if the Chargers said, hey, we'd love to have you and you could get to coach Justin Herbert, I think that would be very, very tempting for him. I don't know how it wouldn't, but if that doesn't happen, I think, from everything I had heard, that they felt like he was going to be coming back to Michigan. So, I guess this is going to be interesting to see, because it's not a shock that the Chargers job has come open. I mean, it's not a shock that some of these other jobs are open. The question is Jim Harbaugh stopping now where it was? It's interesting because one of the people who seem to have done really well on that Chargers staff is Pep Hamilton.
Right.
He's done a good job with Justin Herbert. And Pep Hamilton, as you all know,
Yep.
has spent a lot of time around Jim Harbaugh, both at Stanford and then again at Michigan. So I don't know. This would be interesting. It's hard to. Jim Harbaugh is pretty unpredictable in the way he's operated. He's never been anywhere as a coaching staff as long as he's been at Michigan right now. So there's a lot of moving parts in this, from what I'm told.
Bruce Feldman, The Athletic and Fox Sports here on the Rich Eisen Show. What about Matt Campbell at Iowa State or Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern? Are they going to get maybe a Matt Rule type knock on the door from the NFL? What do you think on that front?
I think they will. I think Fitz is probably more likely to engage it. I think a little. I'm not saying he's going to leave, and I'm not saying Matt Rule wouldn't consider it. Matt Campbell wouldn't consider it, but just the read that I have is I'd always heard Fitzgerald wouldn't even think of leaving Northwestern unless he was going to be the Bears head coach, because he just has he and his family have so many ties to that area. But he does he's going to have a new AD. Jim Phillips, who was a great AD at Northwestern, is now the commissioner of the ACC. So some of the things have changed a little bit. I don't know if he would ultimately end up feeling comfortable to leave. He knows he's got a good situation there. He loves the place. His family loves it there. It's just the question is, what could somebody put in front of him that could pull him away? With Matt Campbell, I think it's probably a little different situation where he's at. I think he's continued to build at Iowa State. I think he's probably very interested in saying, okay, we've taken this next big step. What can we do now, from here? And so I don't know. I could see him definitely getting, a lot of people are very intrigued by him. Wouldn't shock me if Jacksonville doesn't end up with Urban Meyer. They end up, looking at him and trying to get him. But I don't, Matt's a tougher one to read. He wasn't a guy who I think was going to leave Iowa State to go to Texas. I don't know exactly if he feels like he's not done yet at Iowa State. That's the thing. I feel like he's taken big steps from a program that was completely on the floor and built it. Does he want to leave, or does he want to see if he can, turn it into a playoff team? I mean, he's done some amazing work there. I just don't know if he's ready to jump at this point.
Bruce Feldman here on the Rich Eisen Show, and you just mentioned how Matt Campbell might want to have Iowa State stick around there to see if he can turn him into a playoff team. But what we just saw play out over the last few weeks, how in the world, if you're not a blue blood, how in the world do you make the Final Four, right? I mean, like Cincinnati sits back there, takes Georgia to the limit, and watches what we saw happen to Notre Dame, for instance. They might have been roadkill or a speed bump as well for Alabama, but it was just so deflating that we saw this selection process play out the way that it did. Texas A&M being another one, but they're kind of a blue blood anyway in the SEC. It just seems to me that this year showed why we either need 8 teams or a complete admission that if you're not a blue blood and you don't go undefeated, see you later. We don't care, right?
Yeah, I think
wrong.
It's a complete. The CFP is a farce, Rich. I mean, everything you said. There is Cincinnati is evidence that you have no shot to get in under this system.
Right.
You just don't, because they were going to get capped wherever. I mean, Florida, is stumbling all over itself down the season, and they're barely budging. Like losing traction in the rankings. It's like these glass ceilings that are placed on these Group of 5 programs. Cincinnati is every bit as good as Notre Dame,
no doubt,
this year. And they went toe to toe with Georgia in basically what Georgia's in Atlanta. And it was a game where, Georgia was down players. But by the way, Cincinnati was down their 2 best defensive players, 2, All-American caliber defensive backs. And they had Georgia on the ropes. It's like, they were down a bunch of linemen. I just think that it shows how good they are, but it also shows how ridiculous the system we have is. I think they need to go to 8. I think they will go to 8 teams because they know there'll be more money there, and they chase the money. And I think they also will feel so much pressure that they have to have a way to have more of an actual pipeline for inclusion, because right now there isn't any. And for them to try to tell people that there is, or, hey, there's an eye test, I mean, they're all full of it. It's not, let's call it what it is. And so does that mean that if Cincinnati was in an 18 playoff that they would be able to beat Alabama? Probably not, but let's
see it. Right.
Not have this facade where they're basically an FCS pro. It's like there's the level between the FCS and the FBS is this Group of 5, which, either let them in or don't use them for fodder to dress up the rest of the sport when it's convenient for you.
Bruce Feldman here on the Rich Eisen Show. And while we're on that subject, the other question way back in the summer, whether there's going to be a season, in the Big Ten saying we're having one, and then here's a schedule, and then, by the way, nothing. And then Nebraska parents and Ohio State alums and very important Ohio State individuals behind the scenes forcing the Big Ten's hand, putting them out on the field, and, the health and safety of the players. We will see down the road what happened by playing this season. All that said, let's place aside the health. The fact that the Big Ten and Ohio State was adamant in Ohio State getting the Big Ten to get back on the field, that paid off. That paid off big time over the New Year's weekend. I mean, what a performance that was. Just an absolute dynamite performance by the Ohio State, taking on Alabama, and I'll be tuned in. I'll tell you that. That's a big matchup right there, Bruce. Big time.
Yeah, I think things got even more interesting because of, look, hats off to Justin Fields. I mean, he was fantastic. What was amazing to me was, if you had told me this was going to happen like after their 3rd game, that this was going to be it, I'd be like, yeah, I could see it, because he had completed almost 90% of his passes in the first 3 games. But you saw him struggle and have 3 picks against Indiana, and then you saw him look like he lost some confidence against Northwestern. Now, Trey Sermon ran wild in that game, granted, they did not have Chris Olave, who's their best receiver, but this is a really talented group of receivers, right? And so offensively, I think they can hang with Alabama. The issue is going to be on the other side of the ball, right? I don't know if their secondary can hold up. Like, Alabama is way better on the offensive line than Clemson is. And right now, the receiving core that Clemson puts out there is not what Alabama has. And I just think that this presents a different test. But if Justin Fields is going to play like he did the other night, and they're going to come out with a big chip on their shoulder because they still have it and they have confidence, I think this was a really good thing for the playoff in that regard of what we're going to have, because never mind just that Ohio State is a huge, TV brand and they have a huge fan base that's going to tune in. But I just think, there is a little bit of, there's a newness, at least something, a little like what you had with LSU that has got people intrigued, where it's just not, and this is no disrespect to Trevor Lawrence, who's handled everything, I think in a first-class way. But I just think there's something about Ohio State against Alabama that is very interesting to people, that the other game maybe just is going to be met with a shoulder shrug. People like diehard college football fans are going to tune in, but now I think it's just risen like 3 levels.
Bruce Feldman, have you done your last shows, do you think, with Urban Meyer? You think he goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars? What do you think?
That's a good question, because I think we may have a show this weekend. You know, I don't know. My feeling was going to be 60-40 he stays, but I don't know. Coaches have a hard time to say they're done coaching and get tempted. And he's seen Trevor Lawrence up close in person. He got to see him last year in the playoff and was wowed by him. But I don't know. I mean, you know, the idea of him going into, you know, as you know, winning in the NFL is really, really hard. Bill Belichick's the greatest football coach in the history of the sport, and he just had a losing season. You know, Urban Meyer does not handle losing well at all. It guts him. And I think the idea of that model, when you're not allowed to have 25 first-round picks, the recruiting is not the same, you know, and it's like, you know, how would he handle losing consistently? Not saying he's going to go 0-16, but there's a probably good chance that whatever job he gets, they may be looking at 4-12. I mean, how would that guy deal with that? I don't know. And I think those are things that he's thinking. And to be honest, Rich, I really think Urban may think they may be tempted on one day of the week, and the next day may go, I'm not doing that, you know, and just, or whatever. And so I'm interested to see what he's going to decide. You know, I know it's definitely on his radar, and that part's real. I just don't know what he's ultimately going to make the decision in his heart that he thinks is really the best move for him. Is he really curious to say, how would this work for me in the NFL? I got to find out. If he does, then if he really comes to that decision, then, you know, I could see him in Jacksonville.
Bruce, thanks for the time. Happy New Year. Let's chat before and then after the national championship game. Let's stay in touch. Thanks for the call.
Good. Happy New Year, Rich.
You too. That's Bruce Feldman here on the Rich Eisen Show. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.